We are not alone. You are watching Contact TV with your host, Leslie Mitchell Clark, exploring ufology, metaphysics, and beyond with the world's foremost experts. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you wonderful people out there. And welcome to another episode of Contact TV, now in our, I can hardly believe it, our 14th year. I don't know, but I've been enjoying every single moment of it. And today is certainly no exception because we are welcoming someone I have been so anxious to have on the show for so long, and it's finally worked out. We are welcoming Maria Wheatley. And for nearly 30 years, author and researcher Maria Wheatley has researched megalithic sites across the world. Maria is a second-generation Dowser and geomancer who is the UK's leading authority on the geodetic earth energies, ley lines, and grid lines. And she has, of course, lectured worldwide. We actually met in Wales when she was lecturing. That was so wonderful. She has lectured worldwide and has shown the British dowsers and other dowsing societies how to locate and find geodetic earth energies. And Maria has worked along experts such as Rodney Hale to improve the existence of earth energies and how the stones can actually transmit electromagnetic energies. Now, Maria was the first independent researcher to track down and photograph the elongated, and that's long-skulled beings, people of Stonehenge. And this is something I'm really anxious to get into. And her exciting new finds regarding the long-lost people associated with the ancient monuments will soon be published in her, I know there is a book coming, but she also has a book out, I believe. And Maria, thank you so much for joining us. And it is such a pleasure to have you from across the pond. And you've just come back from another one of your wonderful trips. And one of your most intriguing finds, if you will, is that, for years we've been having to listen to these ludicrous theories of, Iron Age peasants, dragging the triptychs across the moors and setting them up, which I have never believed. And in fact, upon visiting Stonehenge, I've actually been able to feel the energy coming off of the one stone that they allow you to touch. But it is magnetic. It feels magnetic, but also like a force field and tingly. And my daughter felt it too. So tell us a little bit about what your discoveries have revealed regarding the origins of Stonehenge and other megaliths.
Absolutely. Well, first, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and spend this time with you. And 14 years, congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I discovered lots of things about Stonehenge, and I really do tell you what the archaeologists won't. For one, there's a trilithon setting, and for people that don't know what a trilithon is, imagine you're going right into the center of Stonehenge, and there's two stones with a stone on top, and they're very tall, from about 21 feet to 25 feet tall. And on the outer face, that's on the outside of the stone, there was recorded by a curator that spent 25 years at Stonehenge, and I inherited his notes and his experiences there. And he said at one time there was a hole in that stone that you could put your arm in. It was 2 feet long, went right the way down into the inside of the stone, and miraculously, even in a drought, that hole, so we've got a hole 2 feet deep, would fill up with water. But if you stared at it like he did, it wouldn't fill up with water. People started to gather from near, far, and wide because it was said it could cure asthma, eczema, the falling sickness, which we know as epilepsy today, because this was all around the 1940s, 1950s. So imagine that you're at Stonehenge, you've got this healing water, and what did the Ministry of Works do? Because there was then no English heritage, no national trust. They filled that healing water hole up with plastic and concrete. And
Oh,
that's what I show people today. I can even prove the runoff of water, and I photographed that just the other day with the group, and it's very clear. So Stonehenge was a healing monument. And when we go back to the 12th century in England, there was an author called Geoffrey of Monmouth.
oh
He
yes.
wrote a book called The History of the Kings of Britain, still in print today, unbelievably so. And you've heard of it. You're
Mhm.
nodding away. And in that book, he described Stonehenge as this: no stone at Stonehenge doth not have healing power. So that's how he described it. And when we go around the monument, there are certain stones carved in certain ways that are definitely designed for healing. So first of all, that was one of my discoveries that I proved through an eyewitness. So I've got an eyewitness account that was at Stonehenge. Beloved, he worked there for as a guide and curator for 25 years. That's a good witness.
I would say so. I would say so. So it was a healing center, which of course, corresponds to so many Neolithic sites around the world, including, I would have to say the Bosnian pyramid. Dr. Osmanagic told me that there are polymers, there are tunnels beneath the structure and polymers that are known to aid in healing of everything from cancer to corns. I mean everything. So wow. Now this the Stonehenge structure itself. I have a feeling, and I think you've mentioned this to me before, that it has been reused and readapted by a number of cultures. It was never meant to be a graveyard or interment place. Tell me about what it was like what your feelings are that it was like at the very beginning of its use. Was it an astronomical temple? And about these beings that are the creators.
The first phase of Stonehenge nobody talks about, and the archaeologists like to leave it out of the historic record. The first phase of Stonehenge was a ditch and a bank, a really tall white wall around it. So if you imagine the ancients constructed this huge wall, you can see inside of that for one. And the first phase were timber structures. So you had these big timber structures. That was the first phase. Now that got dismantled, and then from Wales, about 150 or so miles away, the ancients imported 56 bluestones and placed them with inside that henge bank and
Mhm.
placed them in a very large circle. That's Stonehenge megalithic phase one. What I discovered about that phase there, so we don't have the iconic stone circle that we all
Mhm.
recognize today. It's a
Mhm.
large circle of 56 blue stones. But what I discovered was at midnight on the spring equinox, directly above the center of Stonehenge, meaning if I'm stood at the center of that big stone circle and I look up to the zenith, then I would have seen a particular constellation called Corona Borealis. That's a very Greek name. If we look at the Celtic name of that same constellation recorded in history, it's Arianrhod. And Arianrhod is a goddess of reincarnation. So
Mm.
at the center of Stonehenge, at the spring equinox, at midnight, we have the goddess of reincarnation looking down at those that participate at Stonehenge. And it was a nighttime temple, because in that first phase of Stonehenge, the heel stone, today famed for being in alignment with a midsummer sun, yes, it is, but more accurate to the second rather than the degree, was a lunar alignment that would rise above the tapering crest of the heel stone every 9 years. So
Mm.
people would have been gathering there at night. And then what I discovered as well, where the Henge Bank was so tall. So you've got a big Henge Bank surrounding Stonehenge, which would have been 6 to 10 feet tall, with the moon at a particular angle in its very complex cycle. It would have reflected the moonlight from the chalk bank onto the chalk floor. Now,
Mhm.
how do I know it had a chalk floor that would reflect that? We're going to go back now to my eyewitness of Trilithon 51 that saw the healing waters pour forth from that stone. What he said was when he was at a dig with Professor Richard Atkinson, who reconstructed a lot of the stones at Stonehenge, he said he lied to the British people and the world. The Henge Bank wasn't just chalk rubble, as he claimed. Tom Gorey, that's the name of our eyewitness, described it as being cut out laser like to form a basin, a chalk basin that came up high. What sort of long lost technology created that with a diameter of over 800 feet? We're told deer antlers were used. No, this was long lost technology.
Mhm. Indeed. And I suppose that very distinctive chalk horse that is visible in Wiltshire, which is not very far from Stonehenge itself, points, I would say, to the same sophisticated technology because it has to be cut out. There is chalk, as I understand it, underneath a certain level, and they knew that, and that's what they wanted. They knew these things, and wow, I wonder if in a past life you were one of the ancients. You
Uh,
might have
well,
been,
um,
huh?
well, I was Dolores Canning's guide for many years. So
Oh,
she was, those that don't know of Dolores Canning, she was
oh,
probably one of the world's greatest past life regression therapists. And I had
the
the
greatest.
pleasure of taking her to numerous ancient sites
Oh,
in the southwest of England. So we constantly discussed, past lives and
yeah.
roles, if you will, at places such as Glastonbury, Stonehenge, and Avebury, and the Uffington White Horse that you're describing.
Oh my goodness. Well, oh, by the way, I could not agree with you more. Dolores Cannon was such a is, I don't believe in death in that way, a tremendously powerful spiritual being and intellect, and really everything that I do as a hypnotherapist is based on her work, her contemporary work. So, how marvelous that you got to spend that time with her. But I can easily see you. I can see you in that environment for sure. And now the long-skulled people that we're talking about, and this again these are we'll call them the megalith builders, for lack of a better term. Are these the same beings for which, we have seen the Paracas skulls, the elongated skulls there in South America, and also there have been cases of elongated skulls, certainly within the Egyptian hierarchy, and they, of course, were descendants of beings that were earlier. It's been proven now that the ancient Egyptians do not have African DNA. Nobody likes to hear this, but it is the truth. They have Indo-European DNA, pointing to a far more complicated picture than anyone had imagined. But the elongated skulls have been seen as recently as 1,000 years ago, I suppose, with the ancient Egyptians. They would prop up in the lines of royalty. Who were these people?
Well, the Paracas skulls are described by Brian Forster, who forwarded my book, The Secret History of Stonehenge, which discusses the elongated skulls of the British Isles and Europe and Egypt and Malta. Malta was very similar, the land of the goddess, to the skulls of the Egyptians and the ancient Britons of Stonehenge. If you put them side by side, which I did in my first book, well, then you're not going to be able to pick out which one is which. They're so similar. Where the Paracas cone heads kind of come up like this, the elongated skulls of the British Isles in Europe, they come out this way, if you
Mm-hmm.
see what I mean. So they
Mm-hmm.
have very long skulls. And what I noticed was they have long skulls, but intriguingly and differently to the Paracas skulls of South America, then they had their ear placements set further back. And their ear, internal ear, was different to you and I. And when I presented these facts to a London doctor, she replied back that that was incorrect, that was not the correct statement. And I said I copy cut paste it from a anthropologist report from Oxford University. And I said, well, what if it is correct? Let's go down that line rather than dismissing it. And she said they'd hear differently. So I think they could hear particular frequencies that I discovered are being emitted by standing stones. Okay, because one
Mm-hmm.
frequency emitted by a standing stone is 18 hertz.
Mm-hmm.
You hear on average 20 hertz. So if these elongated skulls with a different internal ear makeup, perhaps they could hear this infrasound at 18 hertz. So I think their experiences of megalithic sites was probably very different to you and I. We're visual people. Well, I know I'm visual people. I'm not going to speak for the whole of the planet, but I'm a visual person and I see things like that. But I think, yeah, they had different frequencies, and just recently analyzed by the Monroe Institute in the USA, I presented some findings, and the frequencies emitted by standing stones through the ground. Just imagine they can affect and they can go through the ground. Well, some of them are about 133 hertz, which is very meditative and healing and calming, and some are around 285 hertz, which can potentially repair DNA. So I think the
Yes.
ancients were working with these sound frequencies
Mm-hmm.
being emitted by the stones, and that's indisputable. We put probes into the ground exactly where I could dowse this particular type of megalithic energy. If you imagine standing stones can give off particular types of energy patterns, and I can record them because I
Mm-hmm.
know where they are in the land. So I
Yes.
think it was amazing healing sound frequency temple.
Wow. Well, we certainly know a lot more about the impact of sound and healing, and it is a real thing. Now they're talking about it in rather crude terms now, where they're just understanding that music is healing and does certain things to the brain. But in other more arcane disciplines, for instance, I use tuning forks. I have a whole set of them and I use them. I don't really know what I'm doing. It's completely intuitive, where I will pick a sound and that person will resonate it. Maria, I also have to wonder if these very special megalith builders also had increased visual spectrum where they could see more accurately spiritual energies.
Absolutely. I think that's correct. And I would say yes, in full agreement with that, because their brain capacities were bigger, for one, with an elongated skull. If they had a different internal makeup, who's to say that they didn't have the eyes don't necessarily survive, thousands of years. So
Yes.
it's very difficult to say that,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't see why not. And the other thing that I did notice in which I wrote down in my book is Earth energies have a particular energy pattern. Okay, so some are spirals, some are circles. Yes, you get lays, yes, you get grid lines, but you get far more than just that. And you get
Hmm.
these spiral and circular patterns. And what I noticed at Stonehenge and many other places as well, even like the Sphinx Temple that
Hmm.
stands in Egypt on the Giza Plateau, that what the ancients were incorporating is particular types of earth energy that equate to musical harmonics. So you're talking about tuning forks, and it was Fabian Marman that was one of the first to do that. And like I said, what I noticed was at Stonehenge, with these circular energy patterns, a bit like Kepler and Pythagoras discovered the music of the spheres, with all
Mm-hmm.
of those circular orbits of those planets. I've done the same in the Earth. And one of the musical frequencies of Stonehenge, a predominant one, is the major third. And that's still used by Christians today in their Gothic cathedrals and their
Yeah.
churches because it raises your emotional
Mm-hmm.
higher consciousness as well. So imagine that these stones can give off sound frequencies, but the earth can too, in the earth energies that flow through the earth. Now, weave all of that together, weave it together in a mighty megalithic complex, and you have sound emanating from the stones and emanating from the ground.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Now, Maria, you probably know all about this, but I saw this only recently, and it did fascinate me. I was seeing a program on some of the ancient, also pyramidal structures of, say, Thailand and also India, and there are columns that were built for certain sounds. In other words, you can play them almost like a musical instrument. The columns themselves, you tap them, and they appear to be the same, but yet they are tuned. And again, this is a lost technology. We were probably looking at some type of healing center, and certainly in India, particularly with the oceans decreasing, in their amounts. I read the other day that there are something like 250 ancient cities, ancient in the extreme, that are now visible because the ocean water is descending. So this you're right when you say this was a global advanced technology tied to what was here, an understanding of the earth, and you can really see it in almost every culture or remnants of it. Have you ever thought or been to the Yanaguni? They call it the Yanaguni Monument in Japan. It's not a monument. It's a very advanced structure underneath the ocean up in Hokkaido on the northernmost island of Japan, and it is clearly some type of landing pad or structure. It's very symmetrical, and nature just doesn't create things in that way. So if you have a chance, take a look at the Yanaguni Monument and see what you feel. But I think that is also part of the global communication system, electrical system, power system. Interesting, you should talk about thirds too, because of course Tesla was always talking about the power of three. And that,
Druids. I mean, the Druids were one of the first to talk about the power of three,
yes.
for example. But I think, when we look to ancient sites worldwide, it's the templates that they were using. So you could go to somewhere like you've wonderfully described, like Japan, or you could go to Egypt or Stonehenge, and the template, the underlying earth energies and the setup tends to be very similar, but expressed through the cultural eyes of that time. So I think they were using a template of particular types of earth energy, because modern day churches don't have that in the UK, for example, and they lack that spirit of place. They lack a soul. And so when we weave all of this together, it does create and resonate throughout the megalithic structure or construct that it is cited on. For example, it's the same with the Sphinx Temple. That's the major third as well. It's dominant note. It has other notes beside, like the perfect fifth, for instance, but there it's dominant sound.
Wow. Oh, that is really something. Would you say that upon occasion, and particularly in Europe, that churches and cathedrals may have been built on top of power spots? Say, I think Glastonbury, is it not built on top of an ancient temple?
The first structure at Glastonbury Abbey, if we're talking about Glastonbury Abbey, for example, was Joseph of Arimathea built a circular wattle church. Okay,
Yes.
now the dimensions of that are quite interesting because it's 79.20 feet across. That's
Mm.
exactly the same as the blue stone circle within the Stonehenge temple. Now, if you change feet to miles and multiply it by 100, you've got 7,920 feet, which is the diameter of the Earth. Okay, so when we look at the integrated diameters of ancient site, they often equate to the diameter of the moon, which is 2,160 feet, or the diameter of the earth. And when I was looking for a presentation I was given on Atlantis, for example, if we use Plato's description of the three circular islands and we use the diameters, which he was using straights, and we turned those into miles, again they integrated into one particular part, one of the islands of Atlantis, the diameter of the earth. So I see Stonehenge did the same. They probably got that from Atlantis. And then Joseph Arimathea copied his first church of Christendom on a pagan center, which is Stonehenge.
Oh my goodness. Well, and St. Joseph of Arimathea was so tuned in. He was everywhere. He had tin mines in Ireland, and he, in my belief, he traveled with Jesus, and he was educated in the mystical, in the mysteries of India, and came up that way. So he's a fascinating character in history, Saint Joseph of Arimathea. And so there would have been, if there was an aware person early in Christianity, early in that belief system, perhaps some of these power sites would have been utilized for, as you say, more of a church in that circular mode, which are the first ones that are really known about, I think.
Yes, and it was documented by the Romans that conquered Britain from 43 AD until they left, so to speak, that they said to convert the pagan. We were Vikings, Saxons. There were certain times in our history where the English were, dominated by the Vikings in the ninth century. And to convert them, you would turn an ancient site into a church. And that is very well documented in the written record. So, yes, they were doing that for sure. So, some churches do underlie a much, much older site for sure. And the energies there, they decreed where that site would go. The only difference is in Christianity, they started off with a circular pattern like Joseph of Arimathea did, but then they turned it into the cross in the landscape. So I call that the
Mm.
geo cross. So it went from a circle to a cross to like, the um, all the cathedrals and churches adopted that and they integrated certain grid lines. But when we go back to places like Stonehenge, that was the template that was used across the ancient world. They would look for the spiral energy patterns, they would look for the circular energy patterns, then they would look for particular grid lines, and then they would join it all up with lanes that would link one site to another, to
Mhm.
another, to another.
Even, Gobekli Tepe, which is thought to be the most ancient structure that we have discovered, is completely, in my mind, relatable as being of the same kind of function as Stonehenge, but maybe a slightly different perspective. And then why Gobekli Tepe was buried purposefully is also something that is a mystery.
No, no, in England, after each phase, like the Neolithic, which is say 5,500 years ago,
Mhm.
when they finished with the monuments, which were the long barrows, the causeway enclosures, they would decommission them and fill them in, like at Gobekli Tepe. Yeah. So when you go to places like Orkney, they would decommission temples by burying them and infilling them. So that was actually common throughout the ancient world. And just to play
Oh.
devil's advocate here with challenging the dates of some of the sites in the UK, a colleague of mine, God love him, he's the late John Cowing. He was an expert on Silbury Hill, which is the largest man-made mound in
Mhm.
northwest Europe. It's very close to the world's largest stone circle called Avebury. And originally it was gleaming chalk white, just like how the pyramids on the Giza plateau were finished in beautiful limestone, very reflective properties. He took a sample for carbon dating, as did the archaeologist expert Jim Leary, and John's came back 12,000 BC.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, we can challenge dates over here. And I think you'll find in the future, it's not just going to be sites in Turkey or Anatolia and
Yeah.
that part of the world. It will be in the West as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, there's marvelous technology, diagnostic technology, that's helping us or helping people who are pursuing this in it was never more important to have this knowledge than it is now as we begin to descend into chaotic behaviors. And we have to connect with the spirituality that is all around us. Um, I just want to tell you this. It's kind of out there, but it's, I had a dream about Stonehenge before you were going to come on the show. I'm going to say like last month. And in my dream, it was nighttime and the henge was completely corrected and smooth and, exactly as you would imagine it in its pristine condition. And there were individuals dressed in white, beautiful, tall beings, and they were standing in the circle. Some of them were playing some type of drum, some type of rhythmic thing. Some of them were playing some type of horn, but with a beautiful tone, and some were singing. And they were creating, in my dream, a gateway. They were opening a metaphysical passageway in which either a being was going to come in or they were going to go out. But so it was very interesting that we were talking about sound and music incorporated into the purposes of Stonehenge. But might these techniques also have been used to open a gateway?
Oh, absolutely. Everything resonates to music and to sound, and we can enhance that. For example, if you're by the outer sarsen linteled ring at Stonehenge, that's the iconic circle with all the lintels on it, and you were
Mhm.
playing a drum, it has been noted and recorded by universities such as Dr. Rupert Till, that if a drum is beat, you can hear the reverb come back twice. So you do one drum beat and it will come back twice. And what I say in my book is that if we come in harmony with the musical frequency of the earth energy and the musical frequency of place, and we sing as well in that particular tone, for example, then you are in complete resonance with
Mhm.
every single bit of that temple. And that's what I think our ancients were very aware of that. And then add in the right astronomical time to do that with the right place to stand, and then you have this amazing magical place that can be transformative, and I do believe can open up different realms. Because one of the ancient myths of Stonehenge that I love was that every winter solstice The god Apollo, that's a Greek god, the god Apollo would leave Delphi and manifest at Stonehenge.
Hmm.
Okay, and people used to write it in their old almanacs. It's called a cog almanac. They didn't have diaries, they didn't have dates, they didn't have a mobile phone telling you what time it is, but they knew that Apollo would manifest. So is all of that musical resonance manifesting the healing god? And then another ancient legend of Stonehenge says the goddess aspect of Stonehenge could give oracles to people, but they were talking about them as if the gods were present themselves,
Hmm.
manifesting, not a kind of heavenly God at all. So I think all of that could manifest certain entities, call them gods, goddess, at Stonehenge. That was recorded in historical accounts.
Yeah. Well, I completely believe that that is indeed a possibility. And even if we talk about, I do a lot of work in extraterrestrial contact, and very often human beings, are given devices that are like step up transformers. It's as if we need to accelerate our the action of our cells and our vibration. We need to come up so they can meet us halfway, so they can meet us halfway. And it's possible. I mean, it can happen to the individual during meditations, and I am certain that you have had many transplendent experiences in your work over these years. I can't wait to have a glass of wine or maybe a bottle. We'll talk about it in great depth when I visit you in the homeland next. But two things I suppose I wanted to ask you before we say goodbye temporarily. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy of crop circles. Now, there's been a lot of people say different things. I know one individual says it's earth energy that's just being controlled and manifested. But since these things happen so frequently in the Wiltshire area, where Stonehenge, close to that proximity, what do you think is going on? Are they messages? Is it random? Is it two drunk guys from the pub? I mean,
Well, I think it's a mixture of things. Yes, there are genuine ones. Yes, there's man-made ones, and then that's how it is. It muddies the waters, but if we know where to look for the clear waters, that's what we will find. My late father was one of the first in the late 80s and 90s to say it was earth energies. I think, even though I love earth energies and that's part of my life and way of being, I think there's more to it going on. I think it's a case where sometimes an energy from above can meet it from below. I think it's not just one thing. I think it's
yeah.
a multifaceted, different layering that creates these crop circle glyphs that do have messages. Going back to the early 1990s, a colleague of mine, she's writes a lot about books on Mars and various other things besides. One of her colleagues noted a particular glyph was encoded how Avebury was linked to the planet Mars. And a
Mm.
particular crater there registered a particular place within Avebury. And another colleague of mine that I go on radio shows with quite regular is Richard Hoagland. He
Oh
was very
yeah.
famous for Cydonia. And he was on the Apollo mission, and he worked for NASA. Again, when we start looking at these different things, and Richard asked me to look at a stone circle on the moon, and I equated that to stone circles in Ireland and England. And again, they seem to be a bit like the crop glyphs, some of the more different megalithic structures within our solar system. So I think there's a link to the planets, to a previous ancient civilization that might have been off planet. for
Yeah.
example. So I would link crop circles to Mars. Do you see what I mean? To an extraterrestrial race, because that was decoded by David Percy, I think that was, and
Hmm.
other people have done this as well. So yes, they're messages.
Hmm.
Also, when people interact with the energies of place there, they feel that their consciousness has kind of gone up a level. Yeah, their
Well,
spiritual consciousness
why not?
can be raised. And some people have experiences where they feel their illnesses have got better. And a
Mhm.
colleague of mine has looked into Parkinson's disease and the curative aspects of crop circles and stone circles with myself, incidentally. So again, we're looking at layer after layer after layer. We're not looking at just one thing when it comes to a crop glyph.
Yeah, well, that certainly makes an awful lot of sense. And, I think it's important to remember that whatever this is, it seems to be quite benevolent. And, there's no reason to fear it. That's why it's such a these are gentle messages from beings or more than one being, a creation that doesn't want to upset us, that wants to let us know that there's something else. We're here. We're here to support you in this next phase of your evolution. And I think we are getting very close to a shift of consciousness. It may not seem that way in the world right now, but remember this return to hate and we have to clean this out like a wound. It has to be, we have to clean it out. And the only way to clean something as evil and bad as racism and hate is to become aware that it's existing. And so I think we are going through maybe a natural, should I say, culling of what we don't need. And when we learn to love our neighbor as ourselves, when most of the planet is doing that, we're going to see a big shift. And then, I think we're going to have a lot more open communication from different spiritual beings and different biological beings that just happen to be in our neighborhood. So we're in interesting times. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you, and I'm so fascinated with dowsing, I wish I could come study with you. When you are exploring, and of course you've been to many of these spaces many times, but say you're exploring a new space, what is your favorite dowsing mechanism? Do you use the rods? Do you use a pendulum? Or are you just an internal dowsing mechanism now after all these years of tuning into it?
Yeah, I think it's handy when you first start off to use L rods, because L rods are much easier to dowse for earth energies than a pendulum, because it can point to where you should walk,
Hmm.
and that makes it easy. It points you in the direction into which to find something. So it does make it a little bit easier than pendulum dowsing, and it is quite fast like that. I mean, I know so many different types of earth energies now, and there are numerous different patterns in the earth. And my late father inherited some works of some master dancers who recognized the patterns in the landscape, like Gaia's mystical language. Yeah. So if
Mm.
you know the different patterns and they all feel differently, and people will feel them differently, you would feel them differently to me. But once we kind of interact with these energy patterns and we know how they make our body feel, it's like a signature. Oh, that feeling is that type of geospiral energy pattern. Oh, that's that pattern. Then we can find them within the landscape. We can find them sometimes in our own homes. There's earth currents are very common, yin and yang earth currents, for instance. They have a particular energy signature, and if we have one in our home, we can start working with it. For example, a female earth current can help with your intuition, relaxation. They're both healing yin and yang earth currents, but the female one is like nurturing and
Mhm.
intuitive. It's a good place for healing, for divination, for that type of energy work. Whereas if a male earth current, again, they're both healing, but it's a little bit more invigorating. So it got a little bit more of a stronger signature, which is great to interact and work above from time to time. If we're doing kind of divine work, or we're writing, or we're doing something along those lines. So I see it as we can use dowsing. Yes, to douse sacred sites. How wonderful is that? I live in Wiltshire. I live quite close to Stonehenge and Avebury, but not everybody does. So I teach dowsing how to decode your home, to work with the energies within your own home, and how to live in harmony with Gaia today, as well as looking back to yesteryear and seeing how the ancients were integrating the energies therein.
Marvelous. So you're helping people in the here and now to participate and help manifest their happiest lives through all the materials and forces that are here. And what could be a more wonderful calling? Well, Maria, now you've got so much going on. Can you just tell our listeners maybe if they were interested in doing one of your tours, how they could reach out to you and any teaching that you're doing coming up?
Oh, yes, thank you for that opportunity. I appreciate that. I've got a lovely Malta tour coming up on September the 16th, and it's got a few spaces left where we go to the island of the goddess. All of the temples there were dedicated to a female deity, the goddess. In fact, in Old Maltese, there was no word for father. So I'll be going there. And I also have online workshops as well, home study courses, and you can find out more about my courses at esotericcollege.com, and you can find out about my tours at the Avebury, that's Avebury, the Avebury experience.co.uk. That's my touring ones, and my books are on my website as well, and I sell really beautiful copper dowsing rods that have been charged at the center of Stonehenge.
Ooh, oh, I have to have it. And I didn't know you did online classes, so that's very exciting for me as well. I would love to expand my knowledge and information and get into some serious dowsing. All right. Okay, my dear. Well, Maria Wheatley, I cannot thank you enough for joining us this afternoon or evening and I think it's cocktail time at Stonehenge right now. That's a good title for something.
A good title for the next book.
Yeah, it's cocktail time at Stonehenge. Wonderful. Maria, bless your heart and bless all of your efforts and everything you do. And we'll talk further in this next little while. And I'm sure one way or another, I'm going to see you next June in good old UK, in good old Blighty. Okay, my dear, you take care. Thank you so much. We are not alone. You are watching Contact TV with your host, Leslie Mitchell Clark, exploring ufology, metaphysics, and beyond with the world's foremost experts.